Hey everybody, how's it going? So I'm about to start my timber frame open air lean-to on this side of the barn here. I also am going to be doing timber frame eyebrows over the front door and the garage door. I already have those timbers milled. They're over here underneath this tarp. I'll show you. So I had these milled up about a week ago. Nice pile of 6x6 posts, 6x8 beams, 4x6 rafters, and a bunch of 2x4 purlins for that lean-to. Now I also have a whole bunch of eastern white pine logs that the local tree service guy keeps dropping off, which is kind of cool. He caught wind that I was doing some timber framing stuff, and so he just brings over big loads of logs. So I have about 20 or 30 of those, and I wanted to make some big beams to set up as big sawhorses, I guess, that I can put all these on while I'm working on them. Have a lot of pieces at once, a lot of room to move around. So my in-laws have this Norwood Portamill. It's kind of a super fancy Alaska sawmill, and so they hadn't put it together yet. I asked if I could put it together and start using it. So I brought it over, set it up, and I cut a couple logs yesterday, and it's kind of fun, and I wanted to show you guys that sawmill and how it works and just talk about sawing a little bit. So let's get down to where I have those and cut a piece up. So I already milled up one of the logs to get the hang of it, and I'm gonna go grab a new one now. They've been sitting on the ground, which is a no-no because you get a lot of extra dirt on them if you do that. So I'm gonna take that new log over to the barn and rinse all the dirt off it really, really well. If you've ever done any kind of chainsawing and you get your chain in the dirt at all, you know that dirt will very quickly dull the chainsaw blade. So I'm gonna try to remove as much of that from the bark as possible. All right, so I'm over at the sawmill and I'm gonna show you around it a little bit. This is the Norwood Portamill. Essentially, it's a super fancy Alaska sawmill. If you're not familiar with an Alaska sawmill, it's basically a chainsaw mill, and some of them are super, super simple. You can get them for as cheap as like $25, $30 on Amazon, and it's just a clamp that will attach to a board and you slide it along the board on top of the log. A lot of them use this little cage that mounts to the chainsaw, and that rests on top of a ladder on top of your log, and you'll slice underneath the ladder through the log. And then there's this version, which is kind of a really fancy one. I'll go show you how it works a little bit. So over here you have this carriage assembly here that your saw is mounted to. There's a bracket that is attached to the saw right here, and that is attached to here, and you can crank it up or down with this mechanism here for real accurate, repeatable cuts instead of having to change the bracket that the saw's sitting in like you would with a lot of sawmills. The thing I like about it, which most Alaska sawmills don't have because you're putting the ladder or board on top of it, is the log sits on top of these little support things, which is very similar to a regular sawmill. These swing up, and then you have this side, which has a little slides over and screws it and clamps the log really nice and solid in place, which is a huge, nice feature, especially for doing something like beams. You cut the log, then you have a reference face, turn that 90 degrees, and that flat reference face butts up against this piece, which is 90 degrees. and then you cut again, and now you have two 90-degree faces, and then you just keep rolling it, and then you get a nice beam. So for what I'm doing, making these beams, that's a really nice feature. There is a mechanism here, just real rudimentary thing, that when you squeeze this handle, it squeezes the throttle and makes the chainsaw rev up, and you just walk behind it, push it along the ladder, and it rolls really nice and smooth. A true Alaska sawmill, which is much cheaper, is way more, I would say, versatile and packable to take out there. This is definitely a lot more equipment to try to hike out into the woods somewhere, and you would need like more of a solid ground to put the logs on, whereas your Alaska sawmill, you basically, wherever the log falls, you can mill it right there out in the woods wherever you're at. So it's pretty cool, and it's doing the job for what I need right now. I can only do about 10 feet on my particular ladder here, and so I'm gonna cut a square end, then cut about 10 feet, and I should be able to get an 8x8 out of this. The person who cut this didn't do a very good job getting the limbs really nice and close, so they're probably gonna fight me a little bit, but I'll make it happen. The other thing is that my saw is just barely on the low end of what they recommend. This is a Pro Series steel. It's the smallest Pro Series steel. Probably the next size up and bigger would be more ideal. And you need to have your chains reground. I had these reground. My father-in-law has a chain sharpener, and you have them reground to a 10-degree angle rather than the 30-degree angle that is common for cross-cutting, because you need them in a more of a rip configuration. And really, you should order the specialty rip blades, where I think it's a skip tooth every two. It helps clear waste out there a little bit. Ripping logs, that full length cut, is just really taxing and really difficult, and it's definitely slow. Bandsaw is probably 10 times faster, but for just the 4 or 5 logs that I plan on milling into beams, not that bad, and it's kind of fun. So I'm gonna get to it. Here you can see the bracket that attaches to the saw. I couldn't get my smaller saw to start, so I had to keep taking this saw on and off the mill, which is really annoying. But you can see here how it attaches to the mill, which is pretty easy. I really like these log clamps. They're also called log dogs, and they really lock that log down really securely. So I put the narrower side of the log at the front, because that's the side that's going to be your limiting factor on how large of a timber you can get. And I'm just kind of eyeballing the best location for that first cut to ensure that I get the 8x8 that I'm shooting for. Then I'm going to fire it up and start cutting. The first foot or so is in real time here, so you can kind of get an idea of what speed it cuts at. Again, if I had a more powerful saw and one of those specialized ripping chains, I think it would speed up quite a bit. Never as fast as a bandsaw, but it's still pretty decent. This mill is only recommended for up to a 14-inch diameter log, but I was still able to get by with some slightly larger logs. My saw really slowed down after about 8 to 10 cuts and needed resharpening, and I was averaging about 5 to 15 minutes per pass. On a fresh chain and cutting that last pass, which is only about 8 inches of wood, it would go really quick. But the first pass, when there was a lot of bark, and sometimes I'm going through 14 to 16 inches material and a lot of knots, the saw really slowed down. This is white pine that I'm cutting, and those harder knots definitely did slow it down, and I'm not really sure how well it would do through hardwoods. I didn't cut any kind of hardwoods on it. All right, as you can see, these are the beams that I made to kind of make these big sawhorses so I can start working on my timbers in a comfortable work area for the lean-to. Have them all set up here. If you're interested in seeing me build that, I'm going to be using mainly just hand tools, a bunch of hand cut joiners. It's going to be a really cool project, and make sure you subscribe to the channel. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.